In today's video, Booker International winner Geetanjali Shree's new book about violence and a scary point in India's history. What difference does a name make? Florence Knapp explores domestic violence and child raising in The Name. A gay teenager's first love in Open Heaven by Sean Hewitt. An active disabled sex life or just a fantasy novel. Saou Ichikawa's novel Hunchback won Japan's highest literary honours. Emma Donoghue writes a historical fiction about a train that never made it to Paris. A classic by William Somerset Maugham, The Painted Veil. We followed the lives of actors in an amateur play in The Players by Deborah Pike. Irish funny man Ronan Hession writes a novel about a mountain that wasn't there yesterday. A woman washes up on an isolated island when a man and his child are cataloguing a seed bank and maybe hiding something dark in wild dark shores. And interconnected Mexican short stories about young women, gangsters, coercion and violence. Reservoir Bitches. Hello and welcome to Gunpowder Fiction and Plot. My name is Scott. If you're new here, this is a channel where I review books, primarily new release books with an eye on books from a diverse range of locations. I have some excellent, entertaining and or fascinating books to tell you about, but also a couple of really disappointing ones. And as always, I'm going to start from the books I enjoyed least and work my way towards my favourite ones. Beginning with The Paris Express by Emma Donoghue. You never really know what you're getting when you pick up an Emma Donoghue novel. I'm not sure how she manages in some novels to capture my imagination and grip me with characters, while other books she writes can be so bang average. This is a novel about a train destined for Paris, but we know it doesn't get there. It's based on a real-life 1895 disaster. We jump from character to character and we learn of a plot to blow up the train. We learn of the lives of the people on the train. Some are cheating, some are travelling, some are members of parliament, some are all three, and so on. For me, there are just too many characters, and other than being on a train, I don't see why they're there. I don't see the link between them. This reads like a collection of short stories, but one of those collections where you read all the stories and they're not connected in the slightest, other than all these protagonists just happen to be on a train right now. Donoghue is attempting to bring alive this point in history, and she has tied herself really faithfully to her research. It's an interesting idea, but it's ultimately a flawed idea when it comes to writing a novel. There's not a lot for her to say, there's not a lot for her to add, and she really feels the need to justify her research by including all these characters. And the result is quite an empty book, lacking in the substance that she's written in other books. Even the impact of the train disaster is missing because every point of view we get is from a character aboard the train. We don't get anybody outside the train looking at the disaster, feeling the impact of somebody who was dead, missing. Did they survive? We don't know. I think that this is a novel that is limited by its framing, and it's just something that she could not get past. I'd suggest skipping this one. Our City That Year by Geetanjali Shree, translated from Hindi by Daisy Rockwell. I usually love Indian novels, but this one, look, it wasn't bad, but it wasn't up to the usual standards I have become accustomed to. And I'm not sure if that is the fault of the author or the translator. This is a novel about how the voice of academic reason is drowned out by extremism in a city that is never named, but you can easily figure it out with the help of Google. This is a book that feels a lot like a petition novel, but it's actually based around the events of the 1992 Barbary Masjid demolition. Hence, the city can be easily figured out. Shree has used a cacophony of distracting voices, demonstrating how voices get drowned out. But this makes it very hard for me to relate to the characters. It makes it very hard for me to feel the emotions of the situation, which was clearly a very tensed and stressed situation. But it just doesn't impact the way I think that it could have. I think she's been a little bit genius to make the narrator an unnamed scribe. That really helps to highlight how voices get shouted out and drowned over. It is, however, one of those books where the ideas and techniques come at the expense of the readability and enjoyability of the novel, particularly the character development. Clearly an author who is very talented, who is a very good author, but this just hasn't worked from a structural level. And potentially one of the reasons is that I am not an Indian who is familiar with these events. Potentially I'm not the target audience, but also potentially the translator has let them down, or potentially it just doesn't work. Hunchback by Saou Ichikawa, translated from Japanese by Polly Barton. This is a short novel about Shaka, a disabled woman who needs a ventilator to breathe and has an electric wheelchair. It is a novel about her sex life and her desire, and it is intended to be just a little bit or completely shocking. She gets a new male carer, and he reads all of her steamy stories on her erotic website. And this takes on a very surreal feel for me. I wasn't sure if what was happening in this novel was actually happening, or if it was Shaka's fantasies. Was it one of the stories she posted on her website? There is an indecent proposal, and this has all the subtlety of a porno where they order pizza and then shag the person that delivers it. I guess the point is to get you to ponder and to ask questions. And there is an interesting discussion here around the importance of sex to disabled people. But that conversation is really missed. It's not explored at all. Also, Shaka has essentially turned her carer into a prostitute. And there are so many issues here that are very complex and worth exploring. But again, it's just really sparse, which is often the case with Japanese literature. I think that's a language thing and how it translates into English. It's a sparse language when turned into English. But these are issues that need a bit of exploration, and I felt like that was also lacking. Still, it asks, what is the obligation of a carer in this situation? And it does sort of hint at issues around disabled people using prostitutes. There's a lot of stuff here that could have been explored in nuance and depth that this simply doesn't have the pages to do. Shaka's sexual desires are unusual, even for a Japanese novel. Not because she's disabled, although maybe in an indirect way. I'm not trying to tactfully tell you that she's into threesomes or butt stuff. It's way weirder than that. And it's so controversial, I'm unsure I can say what she's into without violating YouTube's terms of use. Anyway, now that I've set a line that I just shouldn't cross, let's cross it. She wants to fall pregnant so that she can have the experience of an abortion. Anything that out there needs the reader to ask a very simple question. Why? Is this meant to express Shaka's anger at society in some way? Is it her naivety? Is it the unreality of the situation? Is it in any way linked to her disability? Has she suffered some past trauma that fetishizes this? I can't help but see it as a privileged thing. Able-bodied people have the right to get pregnant, and if they don't want to keep it, they also have the right to get an abortion. They have the right to make that choice. Well, not everywhere, but in Japan they do. And that is something that feels kind of yuck to say. I mean, disabled people have the right to get pregnant. They have the right to have an abortion. They have all those rights. But at least for Shaka, it's just simply not the reality, which in a way I struggle to articulate. I feel like it maybe backs up my assertion that this is all a fantasy. There is a lot of uncertainty in this novel, and I don't know what is intentional, what the author has sort of left you to fill in, and what is maybe poor character creation, because let's make this clear, the character creation is dire. The themes, the questions, the general level of discomfort in this novel, that's very well written. The characters, horrible. I believe that the discomfort is aimed to somehow replicate the discomfort some people have around people with disabilities having sex. If you're reading this novel, you probably know what it's about going into it, so I'm guessing you're not going to feel that discomfort as much as other people, so you probably need to be hit a bit hard with the weird Japanese sex to experience that discomfort. Maybe that's what she's going for. Now, I rarely comment on this issue because I believe a woman's body is her own and people with wombs should lead the conversation around abortion. That said, I think my personal views are relevant to my experience of reading this book, and I'm pretty strongly pro-choice. But if you're getting a pregnancy termination as a kink, well, I find that really gross. I feel really uncomfortable reading that. I can't imagine anybody is reading this and thinking, I used to know this lady who... Anyway, I focused all of this on abortion, and I feel like I've picked one of the more palatable kinks that Shaka has to hyper-focus on in this review. So to really summarise this book, it has the plot of a porno, it has absolutely terrible character constructions, but it's really thought-provoking and it's really uncomfortable. I don't feel like the themes are adequately explored, but it asks questions and it makes you think deeply about life in a different body, a body that can't do what you can do, and what sort of life that person needs to live. Does that make it a good book or a bad book? I'm a bit conflicted on that one, to be completely honest. Definitely a mixture. Reservoir Bitches by Dahlia de la Cerda, translated from Spanish by Julia Sanches and Heather Cleary. This is a collection of interconnected short stories about women living in Mexico. It is quite brutal, and it is tackling the variety of violence and terrors inflicted upon women. Thematically, these stories are really very well connected. It is really looking at the role of violence in the lives of women. Plot and character-wise, this is also very interconnected, with characters who turn up in one story having their backstories told. You get background, you can see characters repeating in multiple stories, but not every story connects in with the other stories, and that's kind of weird. And I'm not sure about that aspect. It does make me question, did I miss how those characters interlink there? Maybe some of the stories should be tweaked, some should be reconsidered, and some should be combined. But really, that's not a big problem. It just makes the reading slightly strange. I think the linchpin of this novel is the gangster daughter who is on the phone with her friend when she is murdered by her gangster boyfriend. This event provides a lot of characters for the conjoined stories. The murdered girl, the bodyguard, the boyfriend. For me, I think this book would have benefited from these characters having just a little bit more time and a little bit more depth and cutting out some of the other stories. What I love about this book is that the women in it are not always the victims of violence. Sometimes, even often, they are the victims of violence. But sometimes they fight back, sometimes they plot and scheme, sometimes they inflict the violence on other people. And it infects this with a feminist rage. We are manipulated into supporting the violence that a woman is dishing out, which I think points to the strongest aspect of the novel, the plot, because we are supporting things, but also that makes you question violence, and when women are sort of taking on this pseudo masculinity or stereotypical masculinity role of the enforcer, why do we enjoy that when we're reading it? Thematically, other than the obvious feminist themes and the exploration of violence, I don't think there is too much more, but they are very complex and very large issues, and they're explored from a range of different angles in quite a complete way. We get to see how the patriarchy is enthroned in this issue of violence. When our gangster wants her father to avenge the murder of her best friend, he says no. respecting the other man's position, respecting the child of another mob boss, understanding the violence that could be inflicted upon himself and not wanting to prioritise revenge of the violence inflicted upon women. While I understand this argument, that doesn't stop the daughter from pursuing a violent judgment on the murderer. And this all links into the discussion around violence, control, coercion. How does the fear of violence impact upon our actions? And how does that vary based on gender? I'm not sure that this book has the nuance it needs to work. It's trying to be all things, but I don't feel like the plots quite fit into the theme. It kind of gets away with this because they're both kind of good. And also, I'm going to go out on a limb here, but I imagine very few of us know a woman, or for that matter anybody, who is a bodyguard, an assassin, or an heiress to a massive drug cartel. Those of us who do probably work in government. But we're moving from a very relatable position of women who are the victims of violence to very unrelatable positions for some of the other women. And I'm not sure that that is completely relatable. And that sort of moves the novel into fantasy and takes away the realism of some of these themes. When I felt I could understand or empathise with the women in the stories, I felt emotionally connected. Well, with the plot, look, I like the plot, I love those situations. But I've always said I like a simple plot well done. I don't think people who primarily read for plot would agree with my assertion here, but I think people who read for a variety of reasons don't want the plot to dominate. And that's really what I'm saying. I want the plot to be there, not to dominate. And I feel like this is a plot-dominating book that forces the themes to have a back seat. Intermittently, a really fascinating book. I really enjoyed the bits of book about the transfemicide, but that felt like another novel to me that maybe should have been fully fleshed out and been its own book. This is a book that was really good in places, but is way too inconsistent for me, mostly in style, but also a little bit in quality. She has two other as yet untranslated books, and I would be very interested in reading them. She is an author with some quality and with a lot of potential. She's definitely an author who I think is better than the book she has written. This is a book I read with my patrons. Every book we read together, we have a video chat on, and it's always interesting to hear other people's thoughts and just to have a bit of a bookish chat. Right now, I'd like to thank my patrons and welcome my newest members, Serena and Carolyn. If you would like to support this channel, read some books with me and some other wonderful people, or just get your name on this graphic, consider signing up. Link is in the show notes. Moving on. Wild Dark Shore by Charlotte McConaghy. Shearwater is an island seed depository off the coast of Antarctica on which Dominic is the caretaker. Along with his 3 children, he is alone on the island until Rowan washes up one day shipwrecked. People don't just go out sailing this way. The odds of a shipwreck washing up is very low. So what is Rowan doing here? And why won't she come clean to Dominic about it? Also, what is Dominic hiding from her? This is a novel combining mystery thriller with literary fiction, and it lands somewhere in the middle. And I think this genre, Aussie authors are doing better than anybody else right now. I know I'm an Aussie, but we are killing it at literary thriller. I like it when genre fiction goes a bit literary, but I also find myself often burnt by novels that are trying to be both and end up being neither. As somebody who doesn't really care for thrillers, I don't mind a good mystery, but for me, reading a thriller is like trying to feed a dog lettuce. I'm a little bit confused and I'm unsure what you want me to do with this. So with that all said, I think this is a book that has nailed both genres. But I would also say that maybe this is a book that doesn't want me to analyse it too deeply. It's a book that requires me to ignore some of the coincidences. All books have coincidences, some of them more than others, and this one is really pushing the limit of what I will tolerate without taking the piss. I also just hate reviewing thrillers because a lot of the themes that come with them are locked up in the plot and are very hard to discuss without spoilers. There are some rather big and important themes here that I just don't want to mention because of spoilers, but also I would really like to talk about to entice the right people to read this book. Ultimately, you need to be ignorant of things until they fall into place. That is also locked up with how Charlotte McConaghy creates characters too. The three children are an interesting lot. Fen, 17, middle child, only woman on the island until Rowan gets there. Loves marine life, particularly seals, and the seals love her, seemingly having accepted her into their pack. Orly, 10, clings to Rowan as soon as she arrives, while Raph, 18, is distant and surly. He's almost hostile towards Rowan. His character comes across the weakest. Not a shock that a distant character is the one that comes across weakest, but this points out, I think, the skill of the author. She does a first-class job of creating the two youngest children, but wasn't successful in creating the oldest. Orly is clearly suffering from the isolation of the island, needing more friends. Meanwhile, Fen is keeping company with seals, and that develops and has such depth to it as you understand her as a character more. McConaghy possesses that ability of a thriller writer to make you think one thing while something else is actually happening. What she does better than almost any thriller writer writing currently is that she makes both things completely realistic. There's actually quite a lot of skill in that. She has to essentially write two different stories and be careful not to contradict either, while keeping the interactions and events natural. And both stories, both ideas, the story you are misdirected to and the actual stories, have to make you ponder something for a literary thriller to work. I'm not reading this for the twists, but also it makes you reconsider things. What is up with Dominic? Is he a misogynist pig? Is he egotistical? Is he protective, distrusting, a combination, maybe all or none of them? These were my thoughts at various points of this book. And as we question what is happening, our understanding of Dominic as a character changes. It's a really bizarre way of building a character, really. As events unfold, we are struggling to pin down Dominic, but we also feel like we know him more and more. We know if he's a fight or a flight person, for example. That's pretty obvious early on. We know he's hard, we know he's strong, gritty, intelligent, resourceful, and we know he prioritizes the wrong things. This is character construction. But we don't know what he's up to. We don't know how much we can trust him. The seed bank has been left to rot by society, and that's very metaphorical. The five of them must work and figure out which seeds to save, and I'm sure you can imagine that's a hard choice, especially when ecosystems are interlinked. It's an imperfect and a forced situation, but it brings up the idea of humans interfering with nature, when it is right to make a choice about the future of planet, and when it is right to let it run its course regardless of the consequences. Not that this idea is mentioned in this book, but I did start to ponder, if rhinos were being hunted to extinction by lions, should we step in to save them? Maybe you would say yes or no to that, but I think actually articulating why you would say those things is hard. How is saving rhinos from lions different from saving them from poachers? Is it different? And why does that change make us think about the situation differently? This is a novel quite rough around the edges, but it is both exciting to read and thought-provoking at times. Look, it's a very commercial novel and it's selling like hotcakes. But I think one of the reasons for that is that if you are a pure thriller reader, you don't actually need to engage with the literary aspects of this novel. So that gives this book a very broad audience. Unfortunately, I can't say that the opposite is true. If you are a literary fiction reader, I think you do need to engage with the thriller aspects of this book. I'm a bit hot and cold on this book, and that's for two reasons. I know some of you will really love this book and some of you will hate it, and I do make these videos expecting that you will know the sort of books you like, and that you're not just watching these reviews trying to pick up the books that I like. So I'm trying to give you the details so that you can decide. But also, I enjoyed reading this book without loving it. I'm not going to be thinking about this book in 12 months' time, but while I was reading it, I was deeply engaged with it. It certainly wasn't an unpleasant experience reading it, quite like this one, even if it was a bit forgettable. Open Heaven by Sean Hewitt. A remote village in the north of England and two 16-year-old boys meet. This is a novel about first love, particularly first gay love. James knows he's gay before he meets Luke, and the two of them form a somewhat unlikely friendship. Both boys feel like an outsider and they just accept one another. James forms a deep crush on Luke, yet Luke, who is the bolder and brasher of the two by some margin, won't just come out of the closet and kiss James, and James certainly isn't doing that. Luke comes from a broken home. He has a bad boy reputation. He knows how to have a good time. Acceptance here is very important to both boys for very different reasons. While you cannot say that this isn't a novel about first love, I think the importance of accepting people for who they are is the big and central theme of this novel. And that obviously fits quite nicely in with the LGBT plus experience. But it's not an exclusively queer thing, it's a universal experience, which is a clever way of making people empathise with queer people, because at times in our life we have all been outsiders. Also, Luke being from a different class, he can play at a different class, while James, he's hardly likely to go around and start fancying women anytime soon. But even when I say that, I do question, is it really that easy for Luke to change who he is? The comparison of class to identity or queerness is such an interesting question here. We are left unsure of Luke's sexuality for a large part of this book. We can only see Luke's struggles through James, besotted James who thinks Luke is perfect. Character-wise, James and Luke are very likeable. And ultimately, when I'm reading a book, if I can like a character, hate a character, invest in them in any way, that is what I am looking for. I always bring things back to characters in my review, but that is not always the complete picture, because Hewitt is trying to create a relationship here. While the emotions that our characters are going through are excellently drawn, the creation of a relationship suffers from only having one point of view in the narrative. This book kind of needs to be one-sided to work. It would be extremely difficult to write a book about one person longing for another and having that be like a bit of a suspense. Do they like me? Are they the same sexuality as me? And then go into the other character's point of view and have them say, I also like them, or, geez, he's such a good bloke. I don't know how you would keep that information from the reader and have both points of view. Nonetheless, this is the obstacle that prevents this novel from going from good into amazing. This is a quality author who can write, but whose structure and planning didn't quite match his abilities, which has been a bit of a theme with the negative novels today. The Players by Deborah Pike. I only read this book because Deborah Pike was speaking at my library and I was tapped on the shoulder and asked to interview her. And I'm really glad that happened, because not only was she a lovely person and I had a great time interviewing her, but the more I read of this novel, the more I liked it. And by the time I finished reading it, I didn't want it to end. Keep these characters and give me another 10 years of their life. A bunch of uni students rehearse for a play. The actors form a friendship, a kinship, and then scurry off in different directions, keeping in contact with one another, and we follow them for the next 10 years of their lives. We see them grow, evolve, change, stay the same, deal with difficult situations. Initially set in Perth, the novel takes in Paris, Cambridge, Berlin and Dili as we follow Veronica, Cassie, Sebastian, Felix, Josh, Gloria and a few side characters. Ultimately, this is a book about life. Veronica wants to be an actor, so she pursues that dream. She is a selfish character, but also a lovable one. She also demonstrates the fantastic character creation in this novel. When an author can show you the character's flaws and make you understand why she doesn't get along with everybody, but she's still quite likeable to us readers. You're still able to root for them. Ultimately, what I wanted was for Veronica to grow and learn. I wanted her to become a better person. I felt it was in her too. And after all, moving from a teenager into an adult, becoming less selfish is a journey a lot of people take. That investment made me feel much more connected to her and just made me like her so much. Also, she was a very pretty character, and I wanted people to stop pandering to her because she was pretty. I could see how the two character traits were linked, her being pretty and her being selfish. How the consequences of being pretty made her more selfish. And every character has this sort of depth. They're visibly constructed on the page. I could do this with the 5 other main characters. This is ultimately a book for people who love characters. There is such a variety of different characters and such a variety of experiences they go through and the impacts that has on them as a human. We see characters with extreme depression. There's a discovery of queerness, difficulty having a baby, travel, falling in love, breakups, marriages, career success and failure, training, university, jail time, death of a loved one, and so much more. Of course, not every character goes through everything I just listed, but it is a novel that explores how the big life events impact the lives and the characters of these people. It's emotional, it is both uplifting and devastating. Ultimately, it's a book about life. We all have good and bad things happen to us, and this is a book that simply reflects that. It's not a big plot book. The prose and the settings are strong, and the themes really strongly relate to these amazing characters, which is by far the best aspect of this novel. A real gem that has gone completely unnoticed, and I really encourage you to go out there and buy this book if you can. And if you're not in Australia, international viewers may be interested to know that the bookstore Readings or reading.com.au ships internationally. Now, if you didn't figure it out by that last review, we're on to the books I am recommending. We're on to the books that I rate quite highly. The Painted Veil by William Somerset Maugham. Surprise, I like to read classics too. And another big surprise, this is actually my first Somerset Maugham, but it certainly won't be my last. This is a novel about a woman, Kitty, who is pressured into finding a husband. Once a husband is found, Kitty, initially in love with him, grows unfulfilled and is swept off her feet by a completely different man. When her husband, a doctor, finds out about the affair, he asks to be transferred to a town that is fighting a cholera epidemic and asks Kitty to join him. And by asks, I do mean pretty strongly blackmails her. Something that Kitty thinks is a death sentence for both of them. This is a novel that follows Kitty from teenager into adulthood. And again, just like I said in The Players, we see how the big life events impact her character, her value, and we see how she changes as she grows up. This is quite a dated feminist novel, and I don't mean dated in that Somerset Maugham has opinions that we think of as backwards today. I mean that he is critical of the values that we as a society no longer hold at the centre of our values. Nonetheless, our current values did evolve from these, and it's kind of fascinating to see his critique oscillate from history lesson to still very relevant criticism of the role of women and their treatment in society. This is a simple novel that is exceptionally well executed with lovely prose. The setting of colonial Southeast Asia is vivid, and it's kind of surreal to have this classic 1900s Western society with only a few hints that it is set in the East. But when we do get those hints, it is easily enough to create a picture of where this book is set. The invisibility of the local population until they are important to the story or useful to the one of the characters could be a point of criticism for some readers, but I think it is really well written with complete honesty that shows the times for what it is. And from my point of view, 120 years later, in a society that is conscious and condemns racism, even if it is pretty terrible at doing those things, I read that as criticism of the society. Maugham may not have been critical, or his criticism may not have been spotted by contemporary readers, but that honesty in his writing allows it to be different things to different readers. And ultimately, I think that is one of the things that makes a book a classic. It is the timelessness of it. Very few male authors of this time wrote women with any form of nuance or depth, or rather even at all. And Somerset Maugham has not only written Kitty with depth and growth, he has taken some of the stereotypes of the time, some of which still exist today, and he has utilized them in constructing her and then contradicted them. At some points he has shown us why these stereotypes exist, why women fall into these traps, and why they are forced into these roles, and what isn't commonly understood about them, what the society was missing. This is just a very good author, in my opinion, and I'd love to know, if you're a fan of him, tell me, what is your favourite work? What should I read next? Is it his big one? Do I just need to read Of Human Bondage next? Because it's really, really long. Does he have another short, delicious piece like this? The Name by Florence Knapp. Cora is taking her daughter Maya and her newborn son to the register's office to register his new name. Will it be Gordon, after his father, a local doctor and well respected within the community, keeping a family naming tradition alive? Will it be Julian, the name Cora wants, something to break with tradition, allowing him to be his own man? Or will it be Bear, the name 9-year-old Maya would like? One story splits into three names, 3 stories. We catch up with each story at various points in the life of Bear, Julian or Gordon, tracking him from baby right up into adulthood, where he has some children of his own in various timelines, maybe not all of them. This isn't a book about a name, but about parents and how they impact the lives of their children and the people that they become. And both parents have a massive impact on both Maya and on her brother with 3 names. Gordon, the father, is a controlling figure. No, let's try that again. He's violent and abusive. In the storyline of Julian and Bear, he inflicts cruel and horrible punishments on Cora, but Cora is not the same in these timelines either. A woman brave enough to give her son the name she wants in the face of a violent partner is not the same as a woman who is too scared of a partner and does what he wants. This produces 3 very different timelines. The 2 major themes of this novel are nature versus nurture and domestic abuse. And then the themes grow from there. The impact of domestic abuse on a wife's personality, on the children, how role models impact children. What about being loved? What sort of men do we want our boys to grow up to be? What influence that, and how can we create caring men who aren't perfect, but who are basically good? In theory, this is a novel about a boy growing into a man in different circumstances and becoming a different person in each of them. But one thing is constant in all 3 timelines. His sister, Maya, who is also impacted and changed by the circumstances in each timeline. Maya is just as important a character as her brother. We want caring men, but what sort of women do we also want? Maybe we want confident and happy ones. Ultimately, we want a world where men, women, and non-binary folks, and anybody I have missed in that sentence, can all thrive. But how do we create that? Maybe we worry too much about the world around us and not enough on creating the individual people in it. We see 2 humans grow up in 3 very different circumstances and become very different people. And Florence Knapp has had to recreate the same character 3 times, but by starting at the same point and growing them in different directions. She's also had to keep these 3 storylines together and relevant to each other, and they are storylines that naturally diverge from one another, and she's had to find a way of keeping them to stick together. It's almost an impossible task, and what a triumph that she didn't fail at this. While this missed out on the Booker long list, I think it is much more a woman's prize book. I mention this so you can have a bit of a feel as to what kind of novel it is. I'm about to announce my last and therefore my favourite novel in this review, but I want to say this next book and the names, their position may switch on another day based on what sort of book I am in the mood for. They are two books that I think are entirely impossible to compare. Ghost Mountain by Ronan Hession. Is Ronan Hession the funniest man writing today? He's got such a charming sense of humour. He's a more grown-up version of P.G. Wodehouse. Some people will say that this is a magical realism novel about a hill that appeared outside of a town where there wasn't one before, exploring the roles we play because of labels, personal growth, desire and love. I'm going to tell you that's all hogwash. This is for anybody who finds it funny when a man, upon being questioned by the police if he has thrown a certain brick through a window, asks for the brick and promptly throws it through another window, then tells the police, "No, definitely not one of mine. The weight is all wrong." And then an old lady comes out and yells at the police for encouraging the brick thrower in the first place. This is such a charmingly silly novel. If you picked up themes and thoughts about this novel, good on you. But I'll be frank, I was too busy having a great time laughing my head off to engage in any thought of intelligent thought. This novel was hilarious. I'm not going to analyse the themes of this novel. I'm not going to treat it like a literary fiction novel. Quite frankly, I don't think it is. This is the funniest book I have read in 2025, and by quite some distance. I don't feel like talking about this mystical mountain appearing is very important. It's like discussing the police procedures in Hot Fuzz rather than saying it's by the same guys who made Shaun of the Dead. Hession is gentle, kind, hilarious, and stupid in the best possible way. This is a book you can share with your granny and maintain the facade that she is a prudish lady that doesn't care for violence and think that sex needs to be fade to black. Look, I'm going to tell you this just because you need a reality dose. Your gran is either a horny psychopath or her back hurts and she can't be bothered cleaning her sheets afterwards. Either way, respect her, she's almost certainly awesome. Hession at one point refers to sex by saying, "And then she went over to his house and girlfriended him." He possesses such an original and playful way of writing his sentences. His prose is really efficient and descriptive. It is not just for his comedy that I compare him to Wodehouse, but his excellent wordsmithery, the quality of which is not often seen in literary fiction and never seen in comedy. Well, except for him and good old Pelham Grenville. Hession's parents must have liked him better than Wodehouse. What a challenging name to deal with. Comedy is the hardest genre to write, and Hession is doing it so well. And I know I give a lot of praise when I like something, but I sincerely mean this without any sort of exaggeration or embellishment. He really is a generational talent for comedy writing. Don't rush out and read this book immediately. Go out, get yourself a copy, put it on your bookshelf, and wait until you're in the mood for or just need to read something really funny and have a really good laugh. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Bye bye.